Hello, church. Time for another Exodus mini. Today we're going to be talking about a subject that happens often in the scriptures in general, and it happens a lot in the book of Exodus and in Torah in the wider view of the first 5 books of the Bible, which we've talked about as being sort of the contained story that Moses is writing, right? So Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, we don't think of them necessarily as just 5 individual books, but we think of them sort of as one book with maybe 5 chapters. And signs are going to be an incredibly important part of Torah in general, but an incredibly important part of the book of Exodus from this point going forward. And so I just wanted to give us sort of a baseline of understanding so that as we kind of come into this, we can all be on the same page. So when a sign is given in the scriptures, when a sign is given in the Old Testament, when we see a sign here in the book of Exodus in chapter 4, which is what we're going to be starting on Sunday, what's happening is that God is giving is doing a supernatural thing in creation for the sake of giving credit to a person's words or a person's actions, or to someone's words or actions. And I say someone's to sort of broaden that definition, because what we see in Exodus is we see maybe 2 kinds of signs. We see a sign that is going to give a person credit, namely Moses, but then we also are going to see signs that is going to give God credit. Right, so both of them follow the same pattern. There is a slight difference between them. Obviously, one is giving credit to God and one is giving credit to Moses, but they kind of have that same principle. A supernatural thing is happening, and it's not about the supernatural thing. It's about giving credit to the one who is speaking, or the one who is going to act. In the case of Exodus chapter 4, Moses. In the case of the 10 plagues, God, right? So God is going to do the plagues, not necessarily for Moses. It will be for Moses in part, but mostly for the Lord and for his witness then into the rest of the world. We'll talk more about that in our minis coming up here. We're going to be shifting to the 10 plagues, I think, starting next week, and then once we get to the plagues on Sunday mornings as well. I'll talk about that there. But again, these are given to us for the sake of giving credit to the one who is speaking. Moses will write this in the book of Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy is the last book of Torah. There's a lot of repetition in Deuteronomy. There's a lot of repetition in the first 5 books of the Bible. There's a lot of repetition from the other books in the book of Deuteronomy, because it's we can call it the official covenant, or the official contract between God and his people, the Israelites. And so there's some things are repeated, some of the laws are repeated, some of the stories are repeated. But ultimately what's happening is there's kind of a final explanation given so that the people can understand what is about to go on. And in Deuteronomy we see this. This is chapter 18, verses 21 and 22. It says, you may say to yourself, how can we recognize a message the Lord has not spoken? So somebody might come and say, this is what God is saying, right? Moses has been saying this now for a generation in the context of Deuteronomy here. The Lord is speaking to me. The Lord is telling me to do this or to do that. So why do we believe him? What if it's not from the Lord? And somebody just says, oh, the Lord told me, right? And we hear this in today, and we need to be really cautious when we hear that today. And I'll talk about that in just a second. But what do we do? How do we know? What if it's not from the Lord? And he says, when a prophet speaks in the Lord's name, and the message does not come true or is not fulfilled, that is a message that the Lord has not spoken. And the prophet has spoken it presumptuously, and do not be afraid of him. So basically what's being said is, when the prophet speaks, the expectation is that it will come true. God is not wrong. God does not lie, and God is always truthful in the things that he says will happen. So if God said it happens, it will happen. Right? If God says it will happen, it will happen. And so if it doesn't happen, it's not from the Lord. If the prophet says there will be no rain and it rains, the prophet is out of his mind. He's just making something up. But if the prophet says it will not rain and it does not rain, then therefore the prophet's right. Now, what I'm referring to here is the story of Elijah. Elijah in 1 Kings chapter 17 and 18, he prophesies that there will be no rain until he speaks again. And it's 3.5 years, I think 3.5 years before it rains. Now, can I go, it will not rain today, so therefore you must believe in me? The Lord said it won't rain today. Oh, and then it doesn't rain today. That's not a supernatural event, right? That's just weather forecasting. And I could be right and I could be wrong, but the point that I'm trying to make there, right, is it's not just something is about to happen. A car will drive down the road. That's not a supernatural event. It's something different. A house will drive down the road. That's a supernatural thing, right? Houses sometimes get driven down the road, but maybe bad example. But the point that I'm trying to make is that it is a supernatural thing that takes place. And that's why it's giving credit to the person who is speaking. Okay, so again, the point of signs is not for the sake of the sign, and it's not even really for the sake of the glory of the person who does that sign. The signs that we're going to see in Exodus chapter 4 are not to make Moses look like a really cool and important person. Look at this amazing magician. It's so that when he says, the Lord met with me and said to me, we're going to leave the land of Egypt, the people will believe. Okay? It is to connect the words of the prophet or the words of the person who is having the signs with the Lord. So in Exodus chapter 4, we see 3 examples of this. God will give Moses 3 signs. Again, we'll talk about these on Sunday, but I want to give us kind of this foundation to work from. This is in verses 3 and 4. Throw it, and this is his staff. Moses has a staff in his hand. Throw it on the ground, he said. And so Moses threw it on the ground, and it became a snake. And he ran from it, a normal and natural response. It's a real snake. It doesn't just look like a snake. It's a real snake. So he throws the staff on the ground, it becomes a snake. Then the Lord, and I didn't edit here, but this is the divine name of God in all the accounts, or in all the times that we see it here. This is the divine name of God, Lord. I just didn't edit it whenever I was getting this ready. The Lord told Moses, stretch out your hand and grab it. Grab the tail of the snake. Grab the snake, and he stretched out his hand, and he caught it, and it became a staff in his hand again. So the sign is, throw your stick on the ground, and it becomes a living snake. Pick up the living snake, and it becomes a staff. Okay, that's the sign. That's the first sign. Sign number 2, a couple verses later, verses 6 and 7, and these are given kind of in tandem, right? In addition, the Lord, again, that's Lord, the divine name of God. The Lord said to him, put your hand inside your cloak. And when he put his hand inside his cloak, and when he took it out, and then he put his hand inside his cloak, and when he took it out, his hand was diseased and resembled snow. It's probably leprosy, right? And it's a little bit of an assumption, but it's most likely leprosy. It's leprous, right? Bad disease, not good. Put your hand back inside your cloak, he said. And so he put his hand back inside his cloak. And when he took it out again, it had become just like the rest of his skin. So not just I can make something happen and, okay, we'll move on, but now I'm going to also then reverse it. So stick to the ground becomes a snake, pick it back up becomes a stick, hand inside the jacket, leprosy, hand outside of the jacket, better, or back in and back out, better. It's all better. Then again, a few verses later, Moses has had some sort of crisis. He's a little bit worried about this through chapter 4, and he goes on. So it says, if they do not believe this, if they will not believe you and will not respond to the evidence of the first sign, then maybe they'll believe the second sign, right? So I give you two signs so that it's not just one sign, but now it's two signs. This is very wise of God. Obviously, God is always wise. It's very wise of God because people are people, right? And we're not very we're not very believy. We're not easily faithful. And what we'll find is that the Egyptians can also do amazing things, right? And that won't happen for a couple weeks, but so maybe they're not going to be shocked and awed by this, but that's the point. So if they don't believe those two signs, if they don't believe even these two signs, or listen to what you say, take some water from the Nile, pour it on the dry ground, and the water that you take from the Nile will become blood on the ground. Now, this is where we see the point again, right? If they do not listen to you. That's why God has given Moses these signs. He's not just given these signs so that they feel better about Moses. They're given these signs so that they will listen to what he says, so that what he is saying and doing is ultimately going to be received by the people and to be connected to the God of their fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. So as I close, what are we to do with this, right? What are we to do with signs today? How are we to treat this? We don't see supernatural signs really today, do we? And that's a challenge. It's a challenge, and it's a conversation that we could have. It's a whole different conversation, but one that I don't really want to take the time for right now in this mini. But the point, I guess, that we need to do is, okay, so what do we do when we're trying to question whether what somebody is saying is right or what somebody is saying is wrong? Or when we hear somebody say, well, the Lord said to me, the Lord told me, or maybe even more particularly, the Lord told me to tell you, right? Maybe it's I feel something, and I'm being changed and being transformed as I read the scriptures. I know that the Lord is pointing out this sin in my life. This is a little bit different than the Lord told me to tell you, that you should quit your job, something like that, right? Like we should then follow this up with a test of the scriptures. Does what is being said match up with the scriptures? And this is where the reality of where we are differs from the reality of where they are. God is going to be working in a special way in the book of Exodus and in the rest of the Old Testament as well, that makes it a little bit different. And we also have to remember, we see a lot of signs and wonders in the scriptures, but we're talking about a 2,000-year period of history, not just a few days or weeks or months. This is a long time, and when you realize that you spread those out over hundreds and hundreds of years, it becomes a little bit less, oh, why don't we get the same treatment from God? Really, the reality is most people in the history of the scriptures, in the history of those 2,000 years, most of those people are not seeing miraculous signs like, say, this generation of Israelites will see. So that's what's coming up in Exodus, particularly coming up this week in Exodus chapter 4. We'll see it again and again through the rest of Exodus. Again, I said we have credit being given to Moses in the signs in Exodus chapter 4, but then we're also going to have credit given to the Lord when we get to the signs of the 10 plagues later on in the book of Exodus. So that is what we have for our Exodus mini today. Have a good rest of your week, and we'll see you on Sunday.